let's get into the meat of the day, and that's not me. Our first speaker person that's going to be speaking with you is a gentleman by the name of Dave Sparkman. Now, that name may ring a bell to many of you because Dave has been incredibly involved in Minnesota Crossroads. He was one of the founders in building this organization. He's a great man in what he's done as a volunteer there. He's had an impressive career, most recently as a senior vice president of the United Health Group, and is the national board chair of the National Crossroads organization. So he is an incredible resource, and we're so fortunate to have him share a message with us today. And so it's a pleasure to be able to welcome Dave. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Skip. Thank you so much for having me here today. Really a pleasure to be back plugged in with Minnesota Crossroads. My job here for the next few minutes is to share a little bit about my transition, and I should say my transitions, because I've been through 4 different transitions. And as I was thinking about what to say today, a recent sermon that I heard, I think applied to me and certainly to my transitions. You know, I haven't heard of met too many people who are thrilled to be in job transition. Not too many people are out there saying, man, I just can't wait to get laid off. I can't wait for those RIFs or those other letters to affect me, or to have a boss that I just hate working for and can't wait to get away from. You know, there's not many people that are really looking forward to that. So I will attribute that to suffering. And this sermon was about suffering. And when I did a little research on that, if you look at the top 10 life events that people go through, you know, 2 of the top 10 are job loss. And whenever you have a life event, and particularly one that negatively affects you, it's very difficult to get excited about it. So I'm going to label this as going through job transition as a little bit of suffering. Certainly it's not anything close to what Paul and many other people have gone through. But for many of us, it definitely fully interrupts our lives and brings us to a point where spiritually you may be wondering, where is this? Why is this happening? Where is this going? So to anchor our conversation, my conversation with you this morning, I want to refer to 1 Peter 4:19, the New Living Translation says, so if you are suffering in a manner that pleases God, keep on doing what is right. Trust your lives to the God who created you, for he will never fail you. And boy, I certainly found that to be true. The sermon, the pastor referred to 3 powerful clarifying questions. And I'm hoping you're going to take some notes today, because as I put this together, I found myself referring to the notes from the sermon, and hopefully not only the scripture, but the application will be of use to you going forward. The 3 powerful clarifying questions that the pastor challenged us to ask ourselves when we're in the midst of suffering. Number 1, is there an area of my life where I'm afraid to obey? Are we going to trust or not? You know, what is it that we need to start or to stop or to continue? Is there an aspect of generosity that maybe we haven't been fully engaged with? Is there someone that we haven't forgiven? Is there something we're afraid of that we need to look to Scripture to overcome our fear? Question number 2, what is the high road to take in my situation? And the point is that you never get to the right place taking the low road. I'll come back to that in a little bit. Number 3, third question, how can I use this situation to help others? And certainly in the midst of the suffering, you may not have a clue what that is, but I'm hopeful as you start to look down the road that you may see opportunities to start taking notes around to see how that can be of use. How we respond determines what the event or the situation is going to do to us. So those are the 3 questions. Is there an area of my life where I'm afraid to obey? What's the high road to take in my situation? And how can I use this to help others? So those are the 3 questions I applied as a lens for my job transitions. There are 4 transitions, as I mentioned earlier. 3 questions, 4 transitions. Back in 1989, I was discontented with my existing role at Arthur Andersen in Atlanta. Everything was actually going really well. I had just been promoted, but looking down the road as to what was going to come, at least at what I imagined as a wise, mature 27-year-old, my goals and priorities were all messed up. And it was one of those things where the grass is always greener. So despite a wonderful situation that I was in within my employment, I left and joined another company. And that was also a wonderful company, but that then led to 3 years later, me finding myself being misemployed at a company called World Travel Partners. I had moved with my family up to Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of DC. And I found myself completely in a misfit situation. What I was built to do was not what I was doing. And we hit this on step 3 of Crossroads within our aptitudes. But boy, I was in the wrong spot. And I literally had physical things that were happening to me. I broke out with blotches on my skin from the stress that I was going through. Nothing from the pressure of the job, but just how I was just not in the right place. Perhaps you've had something like that happen to you. Now, fast forward 10 years later, I went back to Arthur Andersen in Los Angeles, and we hit this little bump called Enron, and the firm completely blew up. It imploded. I found myself unemployed. What I also found was that a lot of my identity had gotten wrapped up in my job. After all, when people ask us, who are you? The very second question is oftentimes, what do you do? And I found myself identifying with being a partner at Arthur Andersen much more than the many, many other roles I had and responsibilities I had in my life. That unemployment led to what you heard Skip introduce me from that led to United Health Group in Minneapolis. So I came to the frozen tundra of Minneapolis and served at first as a chief administrative officer for one of the divisions, later in the role of culture for the overall corporate group. And there I found myself loving what I did, very tied into the mission and the values of what we were doing. And then we had a management change, and it was determined I was no longer a cultural fit at that organization. And so went through a transition out of United Health Group in January of 2019. And now I'm serving in a volunteer role here at Crossroads Career on the national board and also as the de facto executive director. So those are 4 transitions. And as I applied that lens of 1 Peter 4:19, so if you are suffering in a manner that pleases God, keep on doing what is right and trust your lives to the God who created you, for he will never fail you. And the more I looked at that verse and prayed about that, the more I saw that there were some lessons learned. So again, we had 3 powerful clarifying questions. There were 4 transitions, but I came up with 5 lessons learned, and I just want to quickly share those with you this morning. First lesson is stop asking why this has happened and ask, I wonder what I will learn through what's happening. What is God going to show me through this transition? What does he have in store for me next? And if you're like me, I actually found myself asking that question at multiple times through those transitions. And of course, it never happened as quickly as I thought it should. I am not a patient person. Waiting on what God has to show me or demonstrate to me is not a forte of mine. So I found myself in prayer quite a bit and asking that question, Lord, what are you trying to teach me? What can I learn through this situation? So that was one learning. Second learning, in all 4 of the transitions, I pretty quickly found myself blaming other people or the situation for what had happened. I very easily found myself in a victim mentality versus being accountable for my own actions, not only for what had happened, but for what would happen. I encourage all of you to ask the question, what more can I do to get a different result? Particularly as you're in transition, you may not be getting the results right now that you might think you should. Well, then I think you have to ask yourself, what are you doing and what needs to change? We all know the definition of insanity, right? Can't keep doing the same thing and expect different results. And that goes back to everything that Skip shared earlier about Crossroads career. I encourage you not to go through this alone. I encourage you to get in a small group. Go with people that can help and advise, support, and counsel you as you go through this transition. Get accountable. Third lesson I learned was gaining a more sound perspective allowed me to see a better and bigger reality within the big picture of life, which came back to the trusting my Creator, as you heard in 1 Peter 4:19. Am I really going to trust? Am I going to trust myself? Or am I going to trust God for what he has to show me and demonstrate to me through the transition? That was the third lesson. Fourth lesson, looking back, I can easily see the ongoing development of my life purpose. My life purpose statement is to glorify Christ by helping people and organizations achieve their aspirations and his purpose. How could I help sharpen my own saw spiritually? How could I feed my soul every day to then potentially help others find the food of God's word, as Skip mentioned? So my life purpose became more and more clear to me. It was always there, just hadn't quite uncovered it. In addition to the local resources that Skip mentioned, we have some national resources at crossroadscareer.org. And in it is a podcast that was recently put together on your life purpose and how being should come before doing. So if you're not clear on your life purpose, why are you here? I'd encourage you to take a listen to the podcast. I think it will be a great help to you. Last, certainly not least, of the lessons that I learned was using the change. I now serve as the board chair for Crossroads Career. The pandemic certainly affected us as it affected everyone, and we are changing the direction, resetting the direction for Crossroads Career. In addition to the local ministries, we're now going to offer direct services to people to help them no matter where they are, no matter when they need help, much like the coaching that Skip referred to earlier. If I had not been through those transitions, if I had not been misemployed and unfulfilled, if I hadn't had bosses that didn't line up with what I felt should be done, if I didn't learn that what I thought should be done wasn't always right, if I did not become unemployed, I don't think I would have the heart or the passion to fuel that purpose that I now have of helping people and organizations achieve their aspirations and its purpose. So I encourage you today that hopefully something I may have said would spark something, but most importantly, go back to 1 Peter 4:19, because God's word will not return void. And I certainly found that to be the case for me. Thanks very much, and I'll turn it back over to Skip.
Thank you, Dave. Amen. What a great message. And I know I was taking notes and appreciate the many nuggets of inspiration that I know will benefit all of us. So thank you again, Dave, for all of that you did today and all you've done for Minnesota Crossroads and now Crossroads on a national basis. Now next, another Dave, just makes it easier. Dave speaking today. This is Dave number 2, Dave Cornell. And we're thrilled to have Dave with us today. He has spoken to Grace before. Dave is a keynote speaker, an author, a coach, and the founder of Cultivate Courage. And I bet he's going to talk a little bit about cultivating courage today. I'm not sure, but I'm just guessing he might. But I've heard Dave before. He's got a great message, and we're thrilled to have him with us. So it's great to be able to welcome Dave this morning. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Skip. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. All right, very good. And Skip and Dave Sparkman, thank you both. Both you talked about some things that teed me up very, very well, and so I'm grateful for that. Grateful for that lead-in for what I'm going to talk about today. And as Skip said, we're going to talk about courage. But before we do that today, we need to talk a little bit about fear. So I'm gonna bring up my presentation, and we will go ahead and get started with the presentation. All right. Hopefully everybody can see that now. So Cultivate Courage is my story of recognizing fear in my life and the need to be courageous. And that happened, I'll tell you a little bit more about it in just a little bit, through job transition, through losing my job back in 2010. I want to start out with a little story from way back in 1961, the summer of 1961, when I had just finished kindergarten and would be heading into first grade in the fall. This was the view that I had behind the backstop of my older brother's baseball game. My older brother had just finished second grade. He would be heading into third grade, and I'm at his baseball game, and his team is taking the field for the last half of the last inning. And if they got the team out, they would win the ball game. So they very quickly got the first 2 outs. And then the third batter that was coming up, representing the final out, was a guy named Billy. Now, Billy, in the little town of Wahoo, Nebraska, where we were living, was a tough guy. Billy was a bully, and you did not mess with Billy. Well, as he was walking up to the plate, my 2 friends that I'm behind the backstop with, Dennis and Doug, started to say, Dave, we dare you to yell at Billy while he's at bat. And I said, no way, I'm not yelling at Billy. And they said, come on, Dave, we dare you, we dare you. And then they did what we actually did back in the day, and I'm sure some of you have it ringing in your heads already. They said, Dave, we double dog dare you to yell at Billy. Well, if you were like me, you know you can't turn down the double dog dare. So I mustered up my courage, and as the pitcher went into the windup and he threw that first pitch, I hollered, swing, batter, swing. Billy swung and he missed strike 1. Dennis and Doug and I jumped up and down. We punched each other in the arms because the high five hadn't even been invented yet. And we turned back, and Billy was staring right at me. Apparently, he felt as though I had something to do with him swinging and missing. That got Dennis and Doug even more excited, and they said, come on, Dave, do it again, do it again, do it again. Pitcher went into his windup. He fired that pitch. Swing, batter, swing. I hollered. Billy swung and missed strike 2. Dennis and Doug and I jumped up some more and punched each other some more, and we turned and looked, and Billy was staring at me again. Dennis and Doug are beside themselves now. Come on, Dave, one more time, one more time. Pitcher goes into his windup. He fires that pitch. Swing, batter, swing. Billy swings and misses strike 3. Dennis and Doug and I jump up and down. My brother's team wins the game. We turn to walk away, and boom. Directly in front of me as I turned is Billy. Billy had dropped his bat, come around the backstop, and I am now looking up at him, eyes to chin. And as I'm looking up at him, I see him begin to clench his fist, and he rears back, and pow, he hits me right in the stomach. Actually, he hit me a little bit lower. He hit me right in the bladder, and he literally made me wet my pants. Now, to this day, I can still remember the warm feeling that I had as I walked home that night. Not because I'd wet my pants, but because I'd had the courage to do something that Dennis and Doug didn't have the courage to do. I was the one that yelled at Billy. There is a price to being courageous, but there is also a price to being fearful. And Dave talked about that in his very first question that he asked. It was all about fear and being fearful. And so as I took that opportunity, I chose courage over fear. There's a price to be paid either way. If I hadn't done it, I'm sure Dennis and Doug would have been, come on, chicken, walk, walk, walk. They would have pounced around like chickens. And I chose courage over fear. So that's what we're going to explore today. We're going to examine a little bit about fear, and then we're going to move on and talk about courage. Fear is something we all face, and yet we rarely talk about it with people. We want to present to the people that we're close to, people that we work with or have worked with, people who are helping us in transition. We want to present that everything is going well, and we don't have any concerns. We don't have any worries. It's all going to work out. And yet on the inside, we are oftentimes in a great deal of pain. But we think we're the only one. And so we don't want to share those fears and concerns. So we hold them inside. We don't ever call our friends and say, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee or let's go get a beer. And while we're there, let's talk about our fears. We don't do that. We hold that inside, and we think that we're presenting to others an air of confidence when in reality we may not be doing that at all. Fear or courage, on the other hand, is a word that we often reserve for firefighters and for police officers and soldiers. We think this is something that other people do. Other people do courageous things. I am here to tell you that we all have opportunities, and I believe almost every day, to do courageous things. And certainly in your transition, as you look for new work opportunities, you have the opportunity to do some courageous things. Maybe it's applying for a job that you don't think you have any chance for. You've looked at the list of recommendations or the list of requirements, and you see that, oh, I only fulfill 5 out of those 10, so why even bother? They won't even take a look at me. Maybe they will, but you'll never know until you take that action. Maybe it's having a difficult conversation with somebody. Maybe it's admitting to someone that you need help, as Skip talked about. So I believe we have opportunities to be courageous each and every day. The foundation of this presentation for me starts in Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. When I lost my job back in 2010, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a little bit, this was a verse that really came to life for me. And what I envision with this verse, if you know the story, Moses, who has been leading the people out of the promised land, has died. And now Joshua is taking over. And God is giving Joshua orders about here's what's going to happen. And in my mind, I envision God with his arm around Joshua as they look down into the promised land. And this is what he is telling to Joshua. He is saying, Joshua, I know what's in front of you. You don't. But I am telling you, I am commanding you, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So as you go in this transition, as you face those fearful opportunities or those fearful times in this transition, remember that the very same God that had his arm around Moses and Joshua and Noah and so on and so, that very same God has his arm around you. And as Dave talked about, do we trust that God has us? He says right there, and he says it over and over again in Scripture, he will be with us wherever we go. Do we believe that? Do we trust that? But for me, that's the foundational piece of this verse of Scripture as we move forward. There's 2 kinds of fears that we face in our lives. First of all, there's rational fear. If the building that you are sitting in right now, I'm sitting in my basement office, if my home were to catch on fire, it would be logical, rational for me to get up and leave, make sure my wife is out, grab whatever I can. The same would be for you, true for you. It would be rational for you to get up and get out. The second kind of fear that we face is irrational fear. And irrational fear is the kind of thing where we lay in bed at night and we say to ourselves, why didn't I call that person? My friend gave me the recommendation of somebody to call about a potential position. I don't know him, so I chickened out and I didn't call him. Why didn't I apply for that job? Why didn't I have that difficult conversation with my teenage son or my teenage daughter? Why? And we lay in bed at night, and then we vow that the next day it's going to be different. We vow that the next day, the very first thing that we do is we're going to make that call to that friend. We're going to make that call back to that potential employer. And then we rationalize and justify reasons why we shouldn't. Well, you know what? It's Friday, it's June, they're probably on vacation, so I'll wait, I'll call them maybe next week. We justify and rationalize all of these things, and we lay in bed again the next night doing the very same thing. Here's how this irrational fear looks. We don't think that we're good enough. We don't think that we're worthy. We worry about what others might think or say. We ask, what if? What if it doesn't work? What if they offer me the job? Then what am I going to do? That scares me. We need to meet others' expectations and so on and so forth. You can look at the list and maybe there are things on there or that aren't on there that apply to you. Secondly, how does it show up? Fear often shows up in avoidance, procrastination, perfection. Oftentimes people say to me, perfection, how does that relate to fear? Well, we put things off and off and off until we have them just perfect. Maybe you've been working on a resume and you're just like, oh no, it's not perfect yet, so I'm not going to send it out. And you waste 2 weeks because it may not be perfect, even though people have told you, send it out. So we wait for perfection, and that's another thing that holds us back. Avoidance, procrastination, and perfection are 3 that affected me in my job transition that I'll tell you about here in just a little bit. I'll give you a moment to ponder this photograph. This is a picture taken actually in northern Minnesota a number of years ago by my son-in-law as he was headed to the Boundary Waters canoe area. The thing that I ask myself, the question that I ask myself as I look at that is, how far out in the road would that branch have had to be in order for that stripe painter to do something about it? Obviously, that wasn't far enough out, and yet it left a mark, didn't it? All they'd had to do was get out, move the branch, and everything would have been fine. But they chose to avoid doing what they needed to do. And very often, that's what we do with our fears. We avoid doing them. We drive around them. We drive over them. We pretend that they're not even there. And as a result, our fear often gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it looks like this. And for me, this is an image that I've had in my mind going back to starting when I was about 28 years old. I'm 66 now. So this was an image that I had really until the mid-50s when I lost my job in 2010. And I want to tell you a little bit about that right now. Never underestimate the value of a crisis. Romans 5:3-4, and Dave again talked about sufferings, but we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. In January of 2010, I lost my job. At the time, I didn't know that we were in the midst of a recession that started in 2008 and really went until about 2012 to 2013. I didn't realize how bad the economy was until I lost my job. I thought, you know, I'm a pretty capable guy. I'll be able to find a job in a month or two. I found out very quickly just how bad the economy was and that this may be longer than what I thought that it might be. And through that time, as it went on and on and on, my wife and I went through all of our savings over the course of about 18 months. 13 months later, in February of 2011, my wife lost her job. She had worked in a church for 15 years. And I had been going to meet with a counselor for quite a while. As this, probably about 6 months in, I started. Skip talked about that, about seeking help. And I went to a counselor, was diagnosed with situational depression. I avoided a lot of things. I avoided going to job groups like Crossroads. I avoided going to church because well-meaning people would come and ask me, hey, how's the job search going? And I didn't have anything to tell them, so I would stay home. And yet I can tell you to this day, I can tell you now, 11 and a half years removed from it, this is truly one of the best things that ever happened to me. Because with the help of my counselor, it forced me to look at fears that I had going back to the time when I was a young boy and facing those fears. If I hadn't lost my job, I never would have been put in that position, and I never would have been able to develop this talk and make a difference for the people who have an opportunity to hear it. So for some of you, this time that you're going through right now may be a crisis. That may not be the case for you. For my wife and I, it was. We were in our mid-50s. We went through all of our savings. We ended up losing our home, and it was a crisis time. And yet I can look back on it and tell you that wonderful, amazing things happened because of that. What are the great things that are going to happen as a result of you being in the position that you're in right now? Dave talked about that again. What am I learning? Lord, what are you teaching me in this process? So never underestimate the value of the crisis that you may be in right now, or maybe you've been in before, or maybe you're going to be facing again. We all face crisis times in our lives. What is the value of that, and what are you learning? Well, we're going to look today at 3 steps of courage. The first step is to name your fear. You have to acknowledge it. I say it's like being an alcoholic or a drug addict. If you're not willing to acknowledge your fear, you're never going to change it. You're going to avoid it. You're going to procrastinate. You're going to drive around it. Think about Moses from the stories in Exodus 3 and 4. Moses was called on by God to lead the people out of Egypt and to the promised land. Moses knew his background. Moses was a murderer, and he didn't feel that he was worthy of being in that role. Moses was a guy that didn't speak very well, and he did everything he could to get out of this. He had to name that, Lord, I can't speak. I got this bad background, but God said, you're the man. You are the guy that I want leading the people out of Israel. He acknowledged his fear, and he moved forward. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to name our fear. So what is your boulder? You cannot change what you don't acknowledge, according to Dr. Phil. So I want to tell you a little bit about my story, and it goes back to November 7th. It starts November 7th of 1969. I was sitting in Mr. Wilson's math class as a 9th grader. It was 9:30 in the morning, and this was out in Buffalo, Minnesota, just west of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And there was a knock on the door, and Mr. Wilson, being the teacher, went and answered the door, and he visited with who was ever out there. And then he turned around and he said, David, they need to see you in the office. So he said, grab your books and head on down to the office. So I picked up my books, not knowing what's going on. And all of my buddies start saying, hey, Dave, what'd you do now? What'd you do now? And I was a good kid. I didn't get in a lot of trouble. So I was as confused as anybody else as to why I was being called down to the office. As I went into the office, the administrative assistant said, go down that hallway and go in the second door on the right. As I went down that hallway and in the second door on the right, there was my brother and the Catholic priest from town. My dad was the pastor of a Lutheran church in town. And there's the Catholic priest and my older brother, now a junior. And the Catholic priest says, Dave, your dad died this morning. Life changed for me pretty dramatically right at that point. We walked across the street and picked up my little brother, who was a 4th grader. As we came out of the school, the Catholic priest got my brothers and I in a little semicircle, and he told us, now, boys, this is going to be really hard on your mom. I don't want you to cry. I don't want you to ask any questions. I just want you to be men. Now, that sounds pretty harsh, but back in 1969, I just think that's kind of the way that they did things. So I listened very well. I didn't cry. I didn't ask any questions. And I did what I thought it meant to be a man, but I didn't really know. What was important to me was what sport is in season. Fast forward 3 weeks later, my dad's had his funeral. We now have, after about a week, went back to school, and basketball practice starts. I come home. We lived literally right across the street from the school. I come home, come into the house, and my mom calls my 2 brothers to the table. Neither of them were involved in basketball. And we sat down at the table. My mother picked up the food off the kitchen counter, came over, set it down on the table, stood up, and she started to cry. And she said, I can't believe I set 5 places instead of 4. Dad's been gone 3 weeks. She set a place for Dad, waiting for him to come home from work. She ran back to her room. My brothers and I sat there in silence. Eventually, my older brother got up and went back and talked with her. And eventually she came out and we sat quietly and ate our meal. Tuesday night, when basketball practice was over, I didn't want to go home to that. So I stayed after practice, shot baskets for a while, took my time in the shower. The night before I'd gotten home, about 5:30, it's now 6:15, 6:30 when I come home. My supper is folded up neatly in aluminum foil, sitting in the refrigerator. I turn on the oven, warm up my supper, and eat it in front of the TV with my brothers and my mom. That started a pattern that I uncovered with my counselor of avoidance. Avoidance of dealing with things that I didn't want to deal with. It was a fear that I had that I didn't want to acknowledge, and I didn't acknowledge it until I was 55 years of age. this pattern of avoidance that happened in work, it happened in relationships, it happened in schools, it happened over and over and over again. And it all went back to that time when I didn't want to deal with my dad's death, when I didn't want to ask questions, when I didn't want to get help, and when I pretended that everything was just fine. So one of the things that I've wanted to do since I was 28 years old was to be a speaker, to do what I'm doing now as a speaker and a coach and a trainer. And yet I have avoided that going back to 28 years of age because I didn't think that I was good enough. I didn't think that people wanted to hear anything that I might have to share. And so with the help of my counselor, I began to dig a little deeper into this avoidance, and I began to uncover self-talk, things that I would say to myself over and over and over again when I would think about becoming a speaker. Now, as I go through this list, think about whatever your hopes and dreams might be. Think about the jobs that you might be seeking out now. What are the dreams that you have, but what are the things that are holding you back? What are the tapes that play in your head over and over and over again, and you get the same thing? Here's one of the things that I would say to myself. Who am I that anyone would want to hear what I have to say? I'm just a guy. Nothing special about being able to stand up in front of a group and speak. There it is. There's the second one. Nothing special about being able to do this. For me, I get great energy and joy out of standing in front of people and training and speaking and coaching. I logically understand most people don't like to do that. But because for me, I enjoy it, I therefore assume that everybody else would enjoy doing it too. Nothing special about being able to do this. These are the things that I would say to myself starting when I was 28 years old and wanted to do that, and uncovered these things when I was 55 years of age because I was avoiding them. I don't have any letters behind my name, so I don't have any credibility. Dave Sparkman, this is for you. You'll know what we're talking about. Some of you are saying, well, on that first slide that you had up there, it said Dave Cornell, BBG. You've got letters behind your name, so don't tell us that you don't have letters. All that stands for is big bald guy. I'm 6'7", I'm bald, and so I thought, you know what, if I don't have any letters behind my name, I'm simply going to give myself some letters. So that's what that stands for, big bald guy. And lastly, I don't have a dramatic story. The people that do this kind of work are people who have survived airline hijackings. They've survived cancer. They were orphaned at the age of 3 and raised in the wilderness by wolves. They have amazing, amazing stories. And I don't have an amazing story. So why would anybody want to hear what I have to say? What is the self-talk that is holding you back? You need to be so familiar with it that when that tape starts to play, you can plug in a new tape. I just read a wonderful book by Jon Acuff, brand new book by Jon Acuff called Soundtracks. And it's about this very thing, the soundtracks that play in our head. So what are the things that you tell yourself over and over again that are keeping you from being who God created you to be? So here's some action steps around number 1. Write your fear down. What is the fear that you have? There is something about taking it out of your mind, writing it down on a piece of paper. My counselor encouraged me over and over and over again to journal and journal and journal. There is something about the process of writing down the things that are challenging you that takes some of their power away. You know, they say that if you write your goals down, you are far more likely to achieve them. I believe the very same thing is true with our fears. If we write our fears down, we are far more likely to overcome them. So write them down. Secondly, write your self-talk down. Again, become so familiar with it that when it shows up, you start to play a different tape. Find a mentor and a cheerleader. Again, this goes back to what Skip talked about asking for help. In this journey, and you saw all of the resources that are available for you through Crossroads. Somebody asked the question, I can't remember who it was, is the coaching free? And yes, the coaching is free. That's where you can get that mentorship and the people that are there to support you and help you to develop the skills, develop the resumes, develop those interview skills. So find people to help you as you go through that process. Secondly, frame your fear. Begin to see your fear in a whole different way. John 9:39 says, I have come to give sight to the blind and to show those who think they see that they are blind. And let's take a look and see how this happens, and then we'll come back to the Pharisees. And Jesus was wanting the Pharisees to see differently. They thought that they saw, but the reality was that they were blind. So here's what the frame says, and we're going to start in that upper left-hand corner. The way that we see things, our beliefs about situations, other people, or ourselves affects how we feel. We're now in the upper right-hand corner. How we feel affects what we do, our behavior or our actions. What we do affects what we get, our results. And what we get tends to reinforce how we see or how we believe. So it's so important to recognize and see the process of this, how we see something. And if you look at this, this in essence is the self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? So if we only see something in one way, we're going to get the same result every time, over and over and over again. So let's take a look at some examples of this. The story of the adulterous woman in John 8:1-8. And here is where the Pharisees have brought this adulterous woman, the woman that was caught in the very act of adultery. They brought her to Jesus and said, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. She deserves to be killed, stoned, and killed. That was how they saw her. How did Jesus see her? Jesus saw her in a whole different way. Jesus saw her as a child of God. Jesus saw her as someone deserving of the love of the Father. Jesus saw her in a whole different way. The Pharisees thought that they saw the right way. Jesus was showing them that there was another way to see this lady. And the interesting thing is, he said to them, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Every one of those Pharisees dropped their stones, didn't they? So they were able to begin to see in a different way. So now let's take a look into your areas of job search and job transition. And I see that some people are posting comments. Unfortunately, I can't see those right now. Hopefully we'll have a little time at the end to address some of those things. So let's go now to what might be affecting you. How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a business person who happens to be a Christian? Or do you see yourself as a Christian who happens to be a business person? Are you avoiding certain types of work? Are you avoiding maybe exploring nonprofit work that might be related to Christian? I'm not saying that you have to do that. But are you seeing yourself as, I need to get this job, I need to make X amount of money, I need to be, I need to have this certain title? Or are you seeing yourself as a Christian that maybe there's a way to be more helpful in the workplace? Maybe there's a way for me to look at my work in a whole different way. So how do you see yourself? How do you see networking? Wow. In the time of transition that I went through for a couple of years, really close to 2 years, I hated going to networking events. And I find that to be true with a lot of people. And I'm sure many of you kind of rolled your eyes and you go, networking, hate it. Oftentimes we look at networking through our eyes only. Why are we going to this? What's in it for me? What can I get out of this? Oh, I'm sure I'll never get anything out of that networking meeting. I've been to 3 of those other ones just like this one, and I didn't get anything. Another way to see networking is that maybe you will be there to help someone else. Maybe you have a connection for someone else that might help them get a job. So again, how do you see whatever situation that you're looking at? How do you see sharing your faith? We often think that, oh, I don't have the gift of evangelism, so I'll leave that up to those people that have that. And yet, maybe you are the very person that through sharing your story with a friend or with a neighbor or a family member or a coworker, just by sharing your story of what God has done in your life, they'll want to know more. So how do you see sharing your faith as something to be afraid of and something to leave for the professionals? Or do you see it as an opportunity to have God work through you, through the Holy Spirit, to make a difference in the lives of someone else? And interestingly enough, Skip talked about this. How do you see asking for help? You know, in the country that we live in, the United States of America, we are taught to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and to do everything on our own. And the reality is that asking for help can be one of the most courageous things that we can do. So do you see asking for help as a sign of weakness, or do you see asking for help as a sign of courage, a sign of stepping into something fearful, and recognize that asking for help also gives other people an opportunity to use their gifts and talents to help you? So oftentimes when we don't ask for help, we're denying people the opportunity to use their gifts to help us. So how do you see asking for help? Something to be afraid of, or something to see as weakness, or something to see as courageous? So where does our C come from? Our C comes from beliefs that we have about ourselves. You know what? I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm not smart enough. I don't have a college degree, and so on and so on and so on. Where do these beliefs come from? These beliefs come from messages. Messages that we get starting from when we are very, very young, and they continue on through the course of our lives. They're messages that we get from our parents, from our siblings, from teachers, from coaches, from band directors, from bosses, from coworkers, from TV, from magazines. And these messages oftentimes are positive messages. But the ones that we hang on to very often are not so positive. And I want to share with you an example of that for me. As a young guy growing up, again, I'm 6'7". Basketball was a big part of my life. I played basketball in high school and college, played overseas in Europe professionally. And my mom always sent me a message growing up: Dave, just because you can do these things on an athletic field doesn't make you any better than anybody else. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, that sounds like a good message. It is a good message. But how I heard that message, how I internalized that message was, Dave, there's nothing special about anything that you do. So that developed a belief in me that there's nothing special about me. So that developed a C, and you go back to my self-talk, nothing special about me. Why would anybody want to hear what I have to say? Anybody can stand up in front of a group and speak. So those messages developed a belief about me that developed a C. Another example of that, you know that my father died young. I developed a message because my dad didn't know his grandfather because his grandfather died young. I didn't know my grandfather because my grandfather died young. And so therefore, I got the message that Cornell men die young. I anticipated that I would die before I was 50 years of age. I lived in a life of fear because that message developed a belief of how I saw my life. I will die before I'm 50 years old. And I lived and made decisions that impacted my wife and my kids and others, not telling anybody that till after this happened. But none of this, again, came out without the help of the counselor. But I did things and made decisions that impacted other people because of the messages and the beliefs and the C that I had about my life. Now, I know we have 47 people on the call with us right now. I know in a group this size, some of you got wonderful messages while you were growing up. But I also know that there are probably some of you on here that got horrible messages. Why did we have you? You'll never amount to anything. I can't wait for you to grow up and get out of here. Those messages developed beliefs, developed a C about who you are, and those messages continue to hold you hostage to this day. I know that to be true because I've had so many people, as I've had the opportunity to share this message with thousands and thousands of people, come up to me afterwards and visit with me, or send me emails and tell me the horrible things that they were told by their parents or by teachers or other important people in their lives. Until you change the message, you'll never change the belief, and you'll never change the see. That's what I did with the work of the counselor, the wonderful, amazing counselor that I had, that helped me to uncover those beliefs and uncover those messages that were holding me hostage and keeping that boulder in front of me. So what are the messages that you've got that have developed beliefs that you have about how you see the world? Are you willing to change those? And I encourage you to do that. You can take whatever your fear is and put it into this rectangle and to begin to see it in a different way. For me, here's the epiphany moment in this journey. The recognition that fear is selfish. With the help of my counselor, I began to recognize that my ability to speak and communicate and tell stories in a way that makes a difference in people's lives is one of the gifts that God has given me. I never saw it as a gift. I always passed it off as no big deal. Anybody can do this. But I wasn't doing it because I didn't think that I was good enough, because I didn't think that I was the only one. Anybody could do this, because I didn't think that I had a message that was worthy of being heard. If I choose not to do that because of my fear, that is selfish on my part. I truly believe that God has brought us together today. I truly believe that at least one of you needs to hear this message today. And if I chose to tell Harry, I'm not going to do that. I'm not comfortable doing the virtual stuff. And, it scares me a little bit. That would be selfish on my part, because it would be all about protecting me, not about sharing what God has given me to share. 1 Peter 4:10, interestingly enough, Dave Sparkman talked about 1 Peter 4:19. So we're going to stay in 1 Peter 4:10. Each one of you should use whatever gift he has received to serve others, faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. So God has given me this gift, and for many, many, many years, I didn't use it because I passed it off as no big deal. That's selfish. That was selfish on my part. What are the gifts and talents and abilities God has given you that you are passing off as no big deal? And yet you are denying people God working through you to make a difference in their lives. Recognize that these gifts that we are given are not for us, but they are for the people that we encounter in our lives every day. So are you willing, and do you have the courage to share the gifts that you've been given? And I'll give you an example of not sharing our gifts, or not sharing and staying in our fear. Here is a question, or here is a statement. This goes back to the Jerry Sandusky, Penn State University sexual abuse trials, going back to the year 2000. In the year 2000, there were two custodians on the Penn State campus, at the Penn State University football campus, where one custodian witnessed Jerry Sandusky, the assistant coach, molesting a young boy in the shower in the morning. Another custodian witnessed Jerry Sandusky molesting a different boy in the afternoon. And they got together and shared the stories with each other of what they saw. They went to their supervisor, and they chose, as a group of three, to live in fear. They said, if we go against Joe Paterno and Jerry Sandusky and Penn State football, that would be like going against the President of the United States. They said, they'll get rid of us all. They were afraid that they would lose their jobs if they said anything. I can get that fear. I understand that fear. But we have a choice to choose fear or to choose courage. They chose fear. Jerry Sandusky, because these three men chose fear, Jerry Sandusky was allowed to molest young boys for 11 more years. I can't imagine what it's like for those three men when they go to bed at night and think, I could have done something? Could they have lost their jobs? Yes. Could it have all been covered up and they're sharing what they saw when all for naught because it was all buried? Yes. Oftentimes when we do courageous things, it doesn't always work out the way that we hope that it will. But at least you will know that you have done the right thing. You have done the courageous thing. We have to ask ourselves, when we have this opportunity to choose fear or choose courage, who pays the price for your fear? In the case of Jerry Sandusky, we know pictures. If you followed that case at all, there were pictures, not of all of the victims, but there were pictures of some of the victims who paid the price because those custodians did not speak up. I know, again, I asked myself the question before we started this today, who would pay the price if I didn't show up and share this message today? Because I believe, as I said, somebody on here needs to hear this today. Somebody needs to recognize fear and courage and the fact that you have a choice in choosing one or the other. Who pays the price for your fear, whatever your fear might happen to be? That's a powerful and a scary question to ask, but it's the question, as I looked at fear being selfish, it's the question that makes the difference every time I give the presentation. Who would pay the price if I didn't do this? You have to remove you from the equation, and you have to take you out of your fear and remove it from your boulder and recognize that when you take you out of the equation, here's what happens. I'll give you a moment to ponder just how clever that is. You thought I was talking YOU, which I guess I really was. But when we face that boulder and we remove you from the boulder, we get bolder. Courage is like a muscle. The more that we practice being courageous, the more that we do courageous things, the easier it is the next time. Now, I'm not going to say that it's ever going to be easy, but it does get easier. So let's take a look at some action steps around number 2. Write your messages down. Again, it takes the power away from those messages, but it also helps you to begin to recognize that tape when it plays and say, I'm going to play a different tape. Write down your old C and your new C. How do you see it now? How can you begin to see it differently? This is something that you may want to share with your mentor or somebody that's close to you, because often we are so close to our fear, we can't see it in a different way, but somebody else can help you to see it in a different way. Write down who is paying a price for your fear and what does that look like. Such a powerful, powerful thing to do. Let's move on to step number 3. We've named our fear. We've framed our fear. Now we're going to claim our courage. This is one of my favorite scriptures, John 10:10. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. That first part of that verse summarizes fear. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. Satan doesn't come into our lives, sending you a text, calling you up, sending you an email, calling you, coming, banging on your door, saying, I'm here to destroy your life. Satan comes and he sends us messages that we've gotten. Who do you think you are that you could apply for that job? You're not smart enough for that. No, why do you think you're too old? You're too young. That's what Satan does. That's how Satan steals, kills, and destroys. The flip side, the other side of the fence. I have come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. I'll go back to what Dave talked about, Dave Sparkman talked about. Do we trust Satan and live in fear, or do we have courage and trust that God wants us to have an abundant life and he is with us wherever we go? We have a choice. I did some research on these boulders. There's not a piece of equipment that can pick up this boulder and throw it down the side of the mountain. This is a picture from the mountains in Colorado for the next county to have to worry about it down below. Where we want to be is on the other side of that boulder where that red truck is. In Colorado, in order to get to where that red truck is, actual scenario here now, it's a 223-mile detour. We can get to where that red truck is in our vehicle, but we got to go 223 miles. Fear causes us to take detours in life. At some point, we come back, and this is what I did from the time I was 28 till I was 55. I would come and push and push and push against that boulder. In doing research on these boulders, I began to recognize and understand that they break these boulders down bit by bit by bit. They take jackhammers and pickaxes, and when possible, they put sticks of dynamite in there, and they blow these things up into breakable little pieces that they can come and simply scoop up and take away. That's what I did with my counselor, was I broke down those fears and those things that were holding me back. That's what you have to do as well. Stop taking the detours in life and begin to chip away at your boulder. So how do we do that? How do we begin to eliminate those negative thoughts? Well, for me as a believer, the very first thing that I do is I pray. I say, Lord, take away these negative thoughts. Lord, help me to replace these thoughts. Help me to begin to live in the abundant life. Be grateful. Recognize that in spite of the fact that you may be out of work, in spite of the fact you may not have had a check for a while, in spite of the fact that there are some bleak things going on in your life, you still have a lot to be grateful for. For me, at the depths of my pain, I had a friend who challenged me, Dave, what are you grateful for? And he said, I want 3 things that you're grateful for. And he forced me, and I was like, why? I don't have anything to be grateful for. And he pushed me and he pushed me and he pushed me. And I said, well, I'm grateful for you, and I'm grateful for your friendship. I'm grateful for my wife. I'm grateful for my kids. And as I started to name 2, 3, 4 things, I began to recognize that I had a lot to be grateful for in spite of the challenges that I was facing. Read a letter. Over the course of my career in sales management, training and development, I got lots of nice letters from people encouraging me in what I had done for them. I saved most of those. And during those down times, I would read those letters, and they gave me great encouragement. Read a book. These are books that I read, some of them a couple of different times, that just made a dramatic difference for me. There you see the Soundtracks book that I mentioned earlier. And that book by Mark Batterson, If, is powerful. Those are the first 2 I would encourage you to read if you were looking for an order, If and Soundtracks. Listen to music. I can't sing. I can't play a note of music, but lyrics have great power in my life. And these are 3 songs. The first one, Casting Crowns, Voice of Truth. And the third one, Sarah Bareilles, Brave. Those are the 2 that I listen most often. The third one, Rise Up, is one that I've just become familiar with by a group called Cain. And those are songs that I listen to encourage me to be courageous, because they are all about that. So listen to music. Again, these are things that I've done. You may do something different, but have a process, something that you do. That song, The Voice of Truth, it was the first thing I listened to every morning when I was out of work. Then I learned about the lesson of the crack. Here's a stalk of corn growing out of cement. This was when we lived down in Savage. We now live in Fergus Falls. And I took this picture 15, 17 years ago. I didn't know I'd ever use it for anything. I just thought it was fascinating that a stalk of corn was growing out of the curb in a main thoroughfare road. And I thought that's really an amazing thing. But here's the interesting thing about this. We would think corn can't grow in cement. Corn can't grow in a road. Somehow that seed found a crack, and it weaseled its way down through whatever, and it found a place to grow in a place where we would never think that it could grow. So we might say to ourselves, can corn grow in cement? No, corn can't grow in cement. But if we simply put the word maybe in front of that, maybe corn can't grow in cement, but maybe it can. Now all of a sudden we've got a glimmer of hope. Now let me give you my example. In spite of wanting to be a speaker and a coach and a trainer, My mindset, my thought process was, Dave, you'll never make your living as a speaker and a coach and a trainer. You're just not good enough. You don't have a good enough story. People don't want to hear what you have to say. And then I learned to put the word maybe in front of that. Maybe I'll never make my living as a speaker and a coach and a trainer, but maybe I will. And that maybe, again, gives us hope. And that seed of corn found a way to grow in a place that we never thought that it would. That word of hope, of maybe, changed my life. And it helped me to be courageous and step forward and begin to do things that I had been afraid to do before. I was still afraid to do them. Courage isn't about fear being gone. Courage is about stepping into our fear. What are the definitive things that you say to yourself that all you have to do is put that word maybe in front of it, and it will make all the difference in the world? So how do we begin to chip away at the boulder again? Recognize the fear will always be there. As I said, this is not about becoming fearless. This is about becoming courageous and stepping into our fear, not knowing where that will lead us. Again, also not knowing what the outcome will be. But recognize that the fear will always be there. Don't wait for it to go away. Do something scary every week. For some of you, maybe being here today is scary. It was like, oh boy, I don't know if I want to be on this group or not. They might ask me questions. Maybe this was a scary thing for you. What do you do to make yourself feel uncomfortable? Become comfortable feeling uncomfortable. Maybe it's uncomfortable to go to the next live networking group. Maybe it's uncomfortable to make that phone call to somebody who's given you a lead. Do those scary things. Don't discount your own abilities. I believe that everybody that's on this call is capable of far more than you give yourselves credit for. This is a picture of my high school basketball team during a game when I was a sophomore in high school. Now, as a sophomore, I was brought up to the varsity. My coach saw me as a 6'3" sophomore, thought that I might grow a little bit more, and so he decided to bring me up. I played the junior varsity games, but he brought me up and he said, in those games where we're way ahead or way behind, I'll put you in the game and you can start to get some experience. I sat next to the guy you see on the right with the writing across on his head. That's a guy named Steve. Steve was an amazing friend. He was a junior. Steve was the next to last guy to go in the games. I was the last guy. I was actually sitting next to Steve during this photo, but I got cropped out of the yearbook. So that shows you how much I played. Steve was a very funny guy, and Steve said, Dave, here's what we're going to do this year. He said, I've already talked with the manager, and in those games where we're not going to play, we're going to give money to the manager, and he's going to put popcorn and pop underneath our seats so we can enjoy the game like fans. He said, Coach will never know. We're sitting on the end of the bench. He never sees us, and if it's a game that we might play in, we just won't do that. So that's how the season went. And in those games where it was going to be close and we would never play, popcorn and pop was underneath the bench at the beginning of the game. And our manager was so good, he refreshed us at halftime. I don't know how he did that, but he did. And that's how the season went. It's late in the season, late February. We're playing Chaska High School. We're tied with them for the conference lead. This is a game that I do not play in. This is a game that Steve does not play in. The popcorn and pop is there at the beginning of the game. Popcorn and pop is there at halftime, and the game is everything everybody thought that it would be. We're tied. We're ahead. They're ahead. Point or two here or there. Great game. Fans are going nuts on both sides. There's 5 minutes left to go in the game. Steve elbows me in the ribs, and he points down at the head coach. And I look down at him. He's waving at me. I've literally just put popcorn in my mouth, and as I'm going down, I'm thinking, do we need towels? Do we need water? What do we need? I went down there and he said, get in the game for Davis. I was stunned. What is he thinking? I don't play in these games. And I went into the game scared to death. But in those last 5 minutes, I had 5 points, 4 rebounds, and I blocked a shot. I wish I could tell you we won the game. We didn't win the game. But My coach, who had been watching me in practice starting in November through December, through January, now late February, my coach saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. And he thought that I was ready for that time. What is it that you're ready for that people tell you you're ready for, but you pass off? Oh no, I'm not ready. I could never do that. When my coach called me down there, he didn't say, Dave, I think this would be a good time for you to go in the game. What do you think? He said, Dave, get in the game. And maybe that's for some of you, all you need to hear today is it's time to get in the game. You have been in this transition process and kind of coasting, sitting up in the stands, and maybe now all you need to hear is that it's time to get in the game. Fear calls us to be spectators. Courage calls us to get in the game. Courage requires action. Are you willing to take the steps of courage to begin to lead a whole different life maybe for you? Ephesians 3:20 says, now all glory to God, who is able through his mighty power at work within us to accomplish infinitely more than we can ever ask or imagine. So are we willing to recognize that the God who had his arm around Joshua has his arm around us, and he is with us wherever we go? And if we choose to live in courage and not choose in fear, he can do amazing things in his power at work within us that will impact not only us, but the people around us. So steps for number 3, create your list to eliminate the negative thoughts. Find the crack in your boulder, use that word maybe, and begin to do scary things. I'm going to close with one last story, and this is the story from the movie Night and Day, Knight. Tom Cruise and Cameron Diaz meet, and they meet in an airplane sitting across the aisle from each other. And they start with the general niceties of things. Where are you from? Where are you going? What do you do? Then the conversation turns to what they hope to do someday. Cameron Diaz says, someday I hope to write a book. Tom Cruise says, someday I hope to go scuba diving in the Great Barrier Reef. Cameron Diaz says, someday I hope to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And then Tom Cruise brings that whole conversation to an abrupt halt when he says, someday is code for never. Wow. What are the some days that you have? And as we close, I want to challenge you with 3 things. I want to challenge you, or 4 things. I want to challenge you to name your fear. I want to challenge you to frame your fear. And I want to challenge you to claim your courage. And lastly, I want to challenge you to make today, Thursday, June 3rd, your someday to claim your courage. Are you willing to begin to do something different today and face the fears that you have? Here's how you can reach me. I've got a book. You can find it on Amazon. Here's where you can reach me. I'd love to hear from you, love to connect with you. If I can be of any help or service in your journey, I would be more than happy to do whatever it is that I can for you. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you. And I'm willing to stick around for a few minutes if people have questions. And I'm going to do my stop share, and we'll send it back to you, Skip.
All right. Thank you, Dave. What a great message. I was feverishly taking notes. I'm sure everybody else was too. If you weren't, or if you wish you had, this presentation will be available on YouTube later today, probably, but certainly soon, along with all the other presentations that you may have missed in the past. So don't hesitate to click on to that. I've seen in chat that we've gotten some people that have joined us from across the country in our Crossroads Nation. Karen in Tampa Bay. For any of you, other of you that have joined us from outstate of the state of Minnesota, please put where you are joining us from in chat. It's always fun to kind of see where people are joining us from. So if you're joining us from someplace outside of Minnesota, pop the place into to chat so we can see and welcome you from afar. A couple last things before we're done. You will be getting an email tomorrow about a lot of the resources that we talked about today. I see Atlanta, Georgia, touching in Susan Summers. Thank you, Susan. Great to see you. Hope things are well in Atlanta. But you will be getting an email with a lot of the resources that we discussed today. And also remember to check out the website, MN Crossroads, and a lot of the resources on that website that are available to you, part of the team that is here to support you in your journey, the 8-week classes to help you through job transition, the networking meeting every Thursday between 9 and 11, one-on-one coaching that you can get for your specific questions and situation, and of course, prayer support is always our see Dave joining us from Dallas, Texas, the big D. All right, Dave, thank you for joining us. But our next presentation is going to be an evening one, and it's a cool panel. If you ever wondered, like, what do hiring managers think, or what do they look for? Boy, it'd be nice to be able to talk to one and kind of ask them some questions. Now's your chance. This is a panel of hiring managers and HR leaders, corporate, small. They have just an amazing mix of the who's who of does the hiring. And so that is going to be on Thursday evening, 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. on June 10th. It's a corporate talent acquisition question and answer panel. So if you ever had questions you want to ask people that are making those decisions, now's your time. So make sure you join us on Thursday, June 10th in the evening. Nelson Mandela said, "I never lose. I either win or learn." And so hopefully some of the information that you've had shared with you today, and certainly the things that Dave talked about courage, inspired you and helped you to navigate this challenge that is job transition. Remember, you're not alone. And with courage, you will come through on the other side to a result that's better than you can imagine. So again, thanks for joining us. Look forward to seeing you again, and make it a great day.